Welcome to this gathering of the best in Washington. In a town that is full of events that are featuring undeserved accolades and self-serving faux awards, this is a day when real heroes are honored. My name's Danielle Bryan. I'm the Executive Director of the Project on Government Oversight. And I know for those of you, thank you. For those of you who have come to previous Ridenhour Awards, I know how excited you are about today. And if this is your first time, you are about to experience a soul-nourishing respite where you can bask in what Washington can and should be. First, I want to note that it's a thrill to have so many of our past honorees with us today. We have Thomas Drake, who is very much a free man. We have James Scurlock, the book author, is somewhere. If you could raise your hand. Thank you. Rick Peltz. There you go. The great Cy Hirsch, who we'll be hearing from later. And Thomas Tam. There you are. Thomas Tam. Thank you for all that you continue to do and for joining us as we meet this year's winners. It's my pleasure now to introduce Randy Fertel, who, along with Ham Fish, who unfortunately couldn't be here today, are the real masterminds of this wonderful institution. Randy's new memoir, The Gorilla Man and the Empress of Steak, gives us a clue as to why he was drawn to truth tellers. And I encourage you to get a copy. But now Randy is going to give us a sense of the man these awards honor, Ron Ridenhour.
Masterminds, I kind of like the sound of that. Welcome. What a crowd. Thanks for coming. I have a confession to make. In the Ridenhour Prize committees, I'm often embarrassed to be the only person in the room who's not a complete news junkie. Sitting there with my counterparts from the Nation Institute, the Project on Government Oversight like Danielle, the Government Accountability Project, and the Fund for Constitutional Government, I have to keep asking, now what is it that whistleblower did? But then I quickly become impressed by the undeniable power of the story and the benefits that come with sharing those stories widely. If journalism is the first draft of history, I prefer my news in the revised version, preferably filtered through artistic sensibilities, which I guess is why I became an English professor. Now, it's true that Newt's given a bad name to professors, but I learned a few things while teaching the literature of war, which is what I've been doing off and on for the last 30 years. That's how I got to know Ron, who would come to my classes at Tulane and blow my students away with his mesmerizing voice and his earth-shaking story. One of those lessons that I learned was Jung's dictum that what we do not bring to consciousness, we act out as fate. That truth lay behind my desire to teach the literature of the Vietnam War. As a nation, we largely did not look at that war honestly. The result, we've been acting it out, repeating its blunders ever since. Look at the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan as two of the whistleblowers, our whistleblowing Ridenhour Prize winners we honor today have done so impressively. Why did we begin those wars at all? In part because we didn't learn. War after war, the pattern repeats in these two and many others. The national narrative tries to make a case that we get into wars for idealistic reasons. Usually that case is far from believable when you look closely. And once we're in, wearing our faux John Wayne 10-gallon white hat, we do really bad things. My Lai, Haditha, Abu Ghraib, the list is tragically long. Jung's sonorous quote gave me a reason to teach war literature. The question of how to teach war narratives eventually led me to the study of trauma psychology. When trauma shreds the story we use to make sense of our lives, rewriting that life story is central to recovery. Trauma rends the social fabric, and recovery reknits it, assuring the traumatized individual that he or she is a valuable part of the community. True healing comes from a new, more inclusive narrative when it's conveyed to people who really listen. Recovery means not only coming to understand your trauma, but sharing that understanding. That's what we do here at Ridenhour. We bring important storytellers into our midst and help draw an audience, what an audience, who will really listen, the Ridenhour family. Trauma narratives that truly heal are a two-way street. Just as important as the storytellers or the listeners they manage to cultivate and gather around them. Hearing the tales of their courage also speaks to us, enlarging our moral visions, which is all fine and good and worthy of note, it seems to me, but here's the problem. We all know we're just preaching to the converted here. None of you today will, like Saul in the desert, fall off your mule or ass and change your name, suddenly understanding what you did not understand before. We're all true believers here from the get-go. It's a nice problem to have, this community of whistleblower supporters, but still it's a problem. The challenge is to broaden our audience, to reach those who really need to hear those stories, especially today in the most threatening environment for whistleblowers in decades. Here's one way to meet the challenge. If you feel inspired by what you have seen today, then when you go back to your office, inform your broader community about the Ridenhour Prizes and the heroes of conscience you have just heard. Maybe write a note to some friends, or a blog, or send a tweet, or mention us on Facebook. Part of our mission is not only to bring to public light acts of bravery that might otherwise have gone unnoticed, but also to communicate these stories as widely as possible. We're happy to share the task. Please check our ridenhour.org page, where you'll find the text and videos of the speeches in the coming days. I'm asking you to help us build the Ridenhour Prizes. We don't have the dynamite that funded the Nobels, nor the yellow journalism that funded the Pulitzers. Instead, we boast an impeccable hero, Ron Ridenhour, whom David Halberstam once called an American original, absolutely authentic man in an age that is increasingly inauthentic. Our prize winners are real-life heroes with stories that demand to be heard. Please help extend their reach through your social networks. By doing so, you can help America confront the hard but essential lessons which continue to stare us in the face. Thank you.
As a member of the selection committee for the Truth Telling Award, I can tell you that this year we had a real problem and we could not choose between two of the candidates. Luckily, Conrad Martin and the Stuart R. Mott Charitable Trust came to the rescue so that we could honor both. Leslie Coburn will present the first Truth Teller Award. Leslie, an award-winning journalist, directed, along with her husband Andrew, produced the documentary American Casino. That film chronicles the human impact of the fraud executed by the mortgage banking industry on homeowners and lays bare how the lives of several Baltimore residents unraveled because of that greed. Leslie will present the first award to Eileen Foster, who tried from inside Countrywide Financial to stop the madness.
Eileen, could you just stand up for a sec, just so people can see you? Because I'm going to be raving about you. Thank you. Eileen Foster is a former senior executive at Countrywide Financial. She says there were people at Countrywide who belonged behind bars, that outright fraud was systemic. It is exactly what I and my co-producer, Andrew Coburn, found when we made the film American Casino. As one broker told us, most people in the business were doing it. Systemic, requiring prosecution. Until Eileen appeared on 60 Minutes last December, no one at the Justice Department had ever asked her to step into their office. No one even called her. This key executive, vice president in charge of fraud investigations at the largest mortgage lender in the country, was ignored. The pain and suffering caused by such fraud was immense. People were destroyed, neighborhoods were ravaged. She wanted to talk about it, and no one wanted to listen. Honoring her today is a very important thing, because without Eileen and those like her, we would be in the dark. Remember when the White House said, "We're all, in a way, responsible." We are not all responsible. Those who committed fraud were responsible. Those who cut and pasted and doctored paperwork to adjust income to fit whatever it was they needed, because if they did that, the financial reward would be great. Loans were sold on to hungry Wall Street banks who were paying 110% for them. And there was, as one banker told us, no skin in the game. How can the Justice Department ignore this? How can there be no consequence? A third of Countrywide's loans ended up in default. Systemic fraud. To quote Eileen, it wasn't just one individual or two or three individuals. It was branches of individuals. It was regions of individuals. In 2007, a year before the crash, Foster sent a team to Boston to rummage through recycling bins of the subprime division. Loan officers were forging and manipulating borrowers' income, liar loans. But the liars were not the borrowers. The liars were the loan officers. What they did is illegal. Signatures, said Foster, had been cut off one document and put on another to make it work, to fill the quota, to collect bonuses. After Foster's investigation, 44 out of 60 employees were fired or quit. It wasn't just Boston, it was Chicago, Miami, Detroit, Las Vegas, Phoenix, and Florida. The subprime division began concealing evidence from her. A top manager told underlings to circumvent her office, to go through another office that punished whistleblowers. Foster confirmed the fraud with the audit department, but nothing was done. And when Countrywide, a swamp of bad loans, merged with Bank of America, Foster was promoted and asked whether she would speak with government regulators. She said yes. She was fired. She was fired before any meeting like that ever took place. She was fired as her colleagues were preparing her birthday party. Bank of America asked her to sign a 14-page document to buy her silence in exchange for a lot of money, and she said no. She blew the whistle. After 3 hard years, she won a federal whistleblower complaint against B of A. She won $1 million in back pay and benefits. She is now weathering a grueling appeal. Eileen Foster is a hero of the mess we call the financial meltdown, and without Eileen Foster and others as brave, the country will sink under this systemic corruption. We salute her today. Eileen.
To all of you, my most sincere thank you. The annual Ridenhour Prizes recognize acts of truth-telling that protect the public interest, promote social justice, and illuminate a more just vision of society. But this award from the Nation Institute and the Fertel Foundation is about much more than honoring my actions. I come before you today to represent so many financial employees who tried to do their jobs, to do the right thing, but were punished for doing so. With me today are two other former Countrywide executives, former Chief Leadership Officer Michael Winston and former Culture and Communications Officer Cinder Niemela. Although our responsibilities were diverse, our fates are tellingly alike. An often overlooked but important part of the Countrywide story is the bravery evidenced by many employees who tried to stop the fraud, corruption, and deception. Mike Hudson, investigative journalist for iWatch News, while researching his series, The Great Mortgage Cover-Up, documented stories of 30 former Countrywide employees that were victimized by that corrupt environment, including Michael and Cinder. They never wanted to become whistleblowers. They just wanted Countrywide to do the right thing. They wanted Countrywide to follow its own ethics policies as well as the law. In the end, we were not only trying to save shareholders, taxpayers, and employees from Countrywide's malfeasant practices, we were trying to save Countrywide from itself. I never realized I would ultimately be labeled a whistleblower. I believed I was hired to improve investigations and reduce fraud. I simply set out to accomplish that. I came to learn that the true expectation was to conform and propagate the status quo. Countrywide wasn't just a rogue culture, it was a cult. And it was one that was welcomed instead of rejected by Bank of America. When I resisted and became a threat to the wrongdoing, I was swiftly dismissed, sending a chilling message to others. My experience with Countrywide has been a series of revelations. I imagine it wasn't unlike what Ron Ridenhour felt when he first heard an account of the events at My Lai: utter disbelief, then shock. Only recently did I realize that Countrywide had perfected a single strategy. The same tactics, lies, manipulations, fabrications used by the loan officers to push through infinite numbers of fraudulent loans were also used to systematically dispose of the whistleblowers who reported it and to protect the management that condoned it. This recipe was so successful, it would also be embraced by corporate lawyers to defeat the claims that could expose and punish the wrongdoers. It is a strategy fully embraced by Bank of America. These lessons highlight the threat of ongoing efforts by corporate America to gut whistleblower provisions in the Dodd-Frank Act. Critics insist that a whistleblower be compelled to first report problems internally, supposedly to provide the corrupt company an opportunity to correct wrongdoing. But when I followed protocol and reported internally, I was summarily eliminated. The wrongdoing was protected, not corrected. We cannot allow corporate malfeasance to run rampant and become institutionalized. People need to know that many corporations use hotlines and reporting policies to silence whistleblowers and conceal fraud. Whistleblower defender and Government Accountability Project attorney Thad Geyer reveals evidence of the true corporate intent in his analysis of whistleblower control strategies. Corporations now screen applicants for whistleblowing tendencies and assign lawyers to participate in internal investigations so they can shield the wrongdoing under a cloak of privilege. The Congress and state legislatures should eliminate the corporate lawyer cover-up by disallowing the use of so-called privileges in these circumstances. So here we are, several years after the onset of the financial crisis, caused in large part by reckless lending and risk-taking in major financial institutions. And still, not one executive has been charged or imprisoned. This stands in stark contrast to the savings and loan debacle in the 1980s, where prosecutors sent more than 800 bank officials to jail. Our current administration has defended the lack of prosecutions by labeling the executive's actions bad behavior, but not illegal. Assistant Attorney General Lanny Breuer told Steve Kroft of 60 Minutes that although the risk-taking was offensive and the greed was upsetting, it didn't mean the DOJ could bring a criminal case. Perhaps we simply need a different means to a justifiable end. When prosecutors were unable to convict Al Capone of racketeering, they convicted him of tax evasion instead. If there is insufficient legal evidence to convict these executives of what we believe are obvious crimes, then the federal government should refocus. Overwhelming evidence of perjury, witness tampering, and obstruction of justice exists in the numerous claims, court filings, and trial and investigative transcripts. We must not let these deeds go wholly unpunished. Perhaps financial industry whistleblowers should be permitted to present their information to the grand juries without the help of the government prosecutors. Then the people can decide how best to address this outrageous wrongdoing. We can and must uphold the law and prosecute those who break it, especially white-collar criminals, no matter how highly placed or how cozy they are with government officials. We must insist on full and complete investigations with accountability and punishment for the guilty parties. We must keep the heat on and see justice done. So many financial industry leaders have failed themselves, their families, their shareholders, and their employees on the most important of leadership behaviors: honesty, integrity, and ethical decision-making. We cannot excuse companies that abuse our trust. We are hoping that the media continues to carry this torch. Thank you again, Nation Institute and Fertel Foundation, for this award. Thank you to iWatch News' Mike Hudson and 60 Minutes' Steve Kroft and James Jacoby for bringing these egregious acts to the public's attention. Thank you to my husband, John, and my family for their continued understanding and sacrifice, and for my dear friends, Michael and Cinder, for maintaining our collective sanity in an effort to defeat an allegedly untouchable foe. And then there are those that I can't thank enough: GAP's Richard Condit, whistleblower defenders Thad Geyer and Stephanie Ayers, and my brother-in-law Matt Tonkovich, all of whom have dedicated many, many hours and legal resources to see these wrongdoers held accountable. Thank you all on behalf of those everywhere who speak truth to power, even in dark times. I will cherish this event. Thank you.
While Eileen stood up to protect us all from a demon at home, our next award recipient is advocating for the truth in our dealings abroad. Legendary investigative journalist Cy Hirsch, who has won nearly every prestigious award there is, including the Ridenhour Courage Award, and some of them he's won multiple times, will present this truth-telling award. From his work with Ron Ridenhour exposing the My Lai massacre in Vietnam to his expose of the Abu Ghraib prison scandal in Iraq, there is no better person than Sy to put into context the historic significance of Lieutenant Colonel Danny Davis's act of truth-telling.
Thank you. So I looked at the bio, and let me tell you a couple of things about Danny that aren't in the bio. One is that he's actually a hero. He actually fought in combat in one of the few really significant engagements in the first Gulf War, 1991. I think he was just first lieutenant, a couple of years in the service. He was a forward artillery observer. There was a tank battle. He got in the middle of it. I know officers who served with him. You know who I'm talking about, a couple of them. One of them is very close to General Petraeus today, who totally, it's sort of complicated, they totally admire his valor. They can't quite understand why he does what he does. But the fact is that he's a warrior. He fought for his country. He's not just a troublemaker. He's also not new to the business of speaking out. He told me just a few moments ago, he's done 7 articles in the Armed Forces Journal. As you know, it was an article in the Journal and an interview with the New York Times that got this current thing going, deservedly so. But he's been there for years. I ran into, what, 4, 5, 6 years ago, we had lunch and pissed and moaned about, was it Iraq? Who knows? It could have been Iraq. It could have been anything. It could have been Afghanistan. It could have been anything. And so he's been doing it for a long time, and he's been putting, it's just a simple thing. There are some people who I admire deeply in the military who actually take an oath of office to the Constitution and mean it. And let me tell you, if Randy can quote Jung, and I'm glad you did, because you make it easy for me to quote de Tocqueville. I don't know what Ridenhour would think of us talking about Jung and de Tocqueville. He was a pretty meat and potatoes guy. But you got to understand the ethos that he comes out of and what an exceptional person it is to do what he does. And don't ask me why I know this stuff, but in Book 2, Chapter 22, in his famous book, Democracy in America, there's a chapter called Why Democratic Nations Naturally Desire Peace and Democratic Armies War. And here's what he says. He said, in democratic armies, I'll just read you a few things, if I can get my glasses right. In democratic armies, all the soldiers may become officers, which, as opposed to the royalty and the noblesse oblige of the European armies, which makes the desire of promotion general and immeasurably extends the bounds of military ambition. The officer, on his part, sees nothing that naturally and necessarily stops him at one grade more than another. And each grade has immense importance in his eyes because his rank in society almost always depends on his rank in the army. Among democratic nations, it often happens that an officer has no property but his pay, and no distinction but that of military honors. Consequently, as often as his duties change, his fortune changes, and he becomes, as it is, a new man. In democratic armies, the desire of advancement is almost universal. It is ardent, tenacious, perpetual. It is strengthened by all other desires and extinguished only with life itself. We thus arrive at this singular consequence, is that of all armies, those most ardently desirous of war are democratic armies, and of all nations, those most fond of peace are democratic nations. And what makes these facts more extraordinary is that these contrary effects are produced at the same time by the principle of equality. So here we are, we're confronted with, in moments of crisis, what do presidents do? Presidents always turn to the generals, because the generals will tell us always that the war is going well. That's why we have Bush telling us how wonderful Petraeus was, and that's why we have Obama telling us how wonderful Petraeus is. And so how extraordinary it is for someone to, we're talking hundreds of years ago, to fly in the face of all this history. There's a very rare man, and that's why I'm so happy he won that award. Where are you? Okay, buddy.
Goodness, how do you follow Eileen? My stars. Wow, that's pretty amazing. Yeah, I actually had some really nice remarks that I'd written a couple of weeks ago, and they would have been perfectly appropriate. But last night, somehow they just didn't feel right, and I threw them away and wrote another one. So you'll have to excuse me if it's a little bit not as smooth as it might have been. But last week, toward the end of the week, there was a couple of articles I read online in the news. One was in the National Journal with the title of "In Nothing We Trust," with a subhead of "Americans are losing faith in the institutions that made this country great." And then there was a second one on Friday by Peggy Noonan in the Wall Street Journal titled "America's Crisis of Character." And in this article, she's listing a number of things that have happened in the past week, as she notes, by Americans across the United States and even abroad and whatnot, that really is, some of them are very egregious and troubling. And after the dialoguing or noting a number of these things, she says, I think more and more people are worried about the American character, who we are and what kind of adults we're raising. In isolation, these stories may sound like the usual sins and scandals, but in the aggregate, they seem something more disturbing, something laden with implications, don't they? And again, these are just from the past week. The leveling or deterioration of public behavior has got to be worrying people who have enough years on them to judge with some perspective. Something seems to be going terribly wrong. And indeed, I think there is something that's going wrong. And one of the key problems, in my opinion, is that we as a society have come to accept the notion that the truth is negotiable. You know, I don't know how many folks that I've talked to, especially before I went public with my story, and I would tell them some example or so of how, you know, the evidence was one thing, and some senior leader made a completely separate comment, and they said, well, what do you expect him to say? I said, I expect him to say the truth, you know? And And let me just tell you, I love this great republic of ours. I mean, I absolutely love the values, the ideals, the lofty principles upon which our country was founded. But ladies and gentlemen, I submit to you that a deep and abiding love for your country does not mean that you turn a blind eye and go silent when you see something wrong. Look, nobody wants to publicly challenge leadership of some organization that they belong to, because you're certain that you're going to face some level of grief, as Eileen graphically depicted over there, and others here as well. But, you know, in the end, I just couldn't sleep at night remaining silent. And I genuinely, this is no fake humility, I didn't want to do this. You know, nobody wants to endure this kind of grief, and I certainly didn't want to. But I just could not sleep with myself at night, knowing that I'm going to say, all right, I know these things, I have some knowledge, but, you know, what's the chances of it succeeding? I projected they would be very low, that I'm going to change national war policy kind of a thing. But to say, all right, in that case, I'm just going to be quiet, I'm going to finish out my career, maybe I'll write a book or something after that, but I'm not going to take any risk that, you know, someone might yell at me, or that my career might be damaged or so. While every day, through the next 2 fighting seasons especially, American soldiers, men and women in uniform, are going to go outside that wire every day, and they're going to risk their physical life. How could I remain silent while they risk their physical life every day? And a reporter recently asked me how I rationalize my speaking out against the military requirement for unity of effort. And I told him there's nothing to reconcile. I have an obligation to stand up for the truth and do the right thing, irrespective of the consequences. An obligation. And in my view, everybody in uniform does. Part of the Army 7 values says that it requires me to bear true faith and allegiance to the United States Constitution, to the Army, to your unit, and to other soldiers. And in regards to integrity, it says, do what's right, legally and morally. Truth-telling and duty and dedication to duty are synonymous. There's nothing to reconcile. But look, one Army guy standing up and doing this probably isn't going to make a difference. And I'd even go so far as to say, you know, the other folks that are being recognized here today, you know, just one of us, just this handful of folks, it's not enough. It's going to take some other people to step out and do some things better. And I'll just tell you, one of the things that has really given me some encouragement and given me hope is that when I see this room here full of people, I mean stuffed from side to side, even up in the balcony there's some folks here. That's brilliant, because that means there's folks that are interested in this. Can I just tell you, if you can't just be in the audience. I mean, I appreciate you, clapping for us, and I appreciate you being part of what's, and honoring what we do. I mean, it truly is appreciative. But, if you really want to honor us, I need you to step out a little bit. Randy said a little bit. Randy mentioned it at first, you need to start telling other people about it. But I'll go a little bit further, and I'll say you need to start doing something. I mean, look at this room. This room is full of, there's members of Congress in here. There's major members of the media, think tank folks, business leaders, all kinds of people. I mean, you guys here really have some influence and some power in certain areas of influence. You need to use that for doing something that's good. Because in the end, we can't be satisfied with saying, yeah, boy, that guy had a lot of bravery. Good job. You need to join in with that, because if we do accept that the truth is negotiable, if we do say, yeah, I know he doesn't really mean that, but that's just how business is done. No. No more. That's got to stop. That's got to stop right here. That's got to stop today. It's no longer acceptable for the truth to be negotiable. And I would, in closing, I would ask you, not the audience, but you as an individual, not you guys, but you as an individual. Let it start with you. Let it start today. Our great republic needs you people, folks like you, every one of you, as an individual, as a group. We need you to step up and to take it to another level and to do the right thing for our country. Thank you.
Okay, you can see how it was hard for us to say, how do you pick, That is a perfect segue, the discussion of the fact that there is no conflict between military service and the truth, to recognize the Ridenhour Film Prize. Semper Fi, Always Faithful, is a film you cannot forget, but you probably will want to. It is excruciating. And if the copy's already taken off your table, I know it's also on Netflix, you have got to go watch it tonight. It is the excruciating story of the Marine Corps' betrayal of their own. The film documents the ongoing efforts of the Marine Corps to cover up and evade responsibility for one of our country's worst water contaminations in history. You follow one man's refusal to compromise the values he learned as a Marine, not to give up in his pursuit of the truth behind his daughter's death, nor on his commitment to help his fellow Marines demand justice. Let's watch a clip.
I joined the Marine Corps in 1970, right out of high school.
I lived that life, breathed it. I loved it.
I came back from Okinawa with my family.
July of 1983, Janie got leukemia. That nagging question of why stayed with me for 14 and a half years.
The contaminants found in the water at Lejeune have been linked to birth defects and childhood cancers.
I feel betrayed by the organization that I represented and that I served faithfully.
These people are sick and dying. It seems like we would be doing everything possible to contact every person who is on these bases.
The Marine Corps has refused to notify their people, and I told them that if they didn't want to live up to their motto, I would.
My son was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma.
I was diagnosed with male breast cancer.
I was diagnosed with cancer in my left kidney.
They knew this about the water. Why they didn't tell us?
I don't believe they should be hiding any information from this audience. None.
We weren't dumping toxic chemicals into the ground.
Really?
The Marine Corps has allowed me and thousands and hundreds of others to get devastating illnesses and die.
You ready?
I was ready for this 10 years ago.
Please welcome Rachel Liebert and Tony Hardman, the producers of this powerful Oscar shortlisted film to receive the 2012 Ridenhour Documentary Film Prize, and who will introduce that Marine who has refused to give up, Sergeant Jerry Ensminger.
Afternoon. We'd first like to thank the nation and Fertel Foundation for this wonderful honor. Rachel and I are deeply humbled to be in the company of this year's recipients, as well as the past courageous recipients of this award, and to be associated with the incredible legacy of Ron Ridenhour. Before I continue, I'd like to mention someone who's in the room with us. We have Mike Partain, who's sitting at table 8. So Mike's worked tirelessly alongside Jerry Ensminger to bring this story to public attention, so we thank him for his work. We found out about this story by chance. We were researching another film when we met Jerry's sister Marie, who's also here today, at table 9 in the corner. And I also want to mention that this award today recognizes the tremendous effort and perseverance of Marine Corps Master Sergeant Jerry Ensminger, and he's been fighting to expose what may have been one of the largest water contaminations in U.S. history. As I was saying, we found out about the story through Marie, and we were researching another story when she mentioned that she had a brother who had discovered a major water contamination at Camp Lejeune and was looking for filmmakers to possibly document his work. We were intrigued, and we showed up here in D.C. a few weeks later to meet Jerry, and it was during that visit that Jerry showed us a fraction of the thousands of documents that he had painstakingly gathered to prove his case. We were horrified by what we saw, but what really hooked us was Jerry himself. At first, he appears to be a gruff former drill instructor straight out of Central Casting, but as we spent time with him, we saw beneath that tough exterior and recognized that his was an incredibly charismatic voice telling a very important story.
When we first started making this film 5 years ago, we were often asked, do you have an ending? And it's a very reasonable question from other filmmakers and funders and everybody, but to us it also reveals a deeper doubt, a kind of cynicism that often runs through our culture. In asking how will it end, it's sort of another way of saying, really, how much can one man possibly achieve when going up against such a formidable opponent as the Department of Defense? Making this film and finding an ending challenged us to look hard at that question, and that's been one of the most rewarding aspects of the past 5 years. We feel this film is a portrait of what it takes to battle that cynicism. It's hard work, and it requires idealism and relentlessness. In Jerry's case, we've come to see it as a special kind of patriotism, and to us, Jerry is just that, a patriot. As a Marine, Jerry truly believed in the United States government and the Marine Corps. He was shocked and disappointed in their failings, and his sense of betrayal runs very deep. But ironically, Jerry's military training prepared him perfectly for the struggle that has filled the last 15 years of his life. His dedication and unwavering belief in our democracy keeps him going to the end of our film and beyond. We're thrilled to be able to share some of that dedication and idealism and relentlessness with you today. And it's our very great pleasure to introduce Master Sergeant Jerry Ensminger.
Thank you. First and foremost, I'd like to take this special time to point out that my brother, who was my inspiration for joining the Marine Corps, who was wounded severely 42 years ago today. That's my brother Dave over there at table 9. Dave had 78 shrapnel wounds on the front of his body, and a piece of shrapnel the size of a quarter went in around his left eyebrow and came out the back of his head. So we know about traumatic brain injuries in our family. So, good afternoon. I'd like to thank the Ridenhour Selection Committee for having bestowed this great honor upon this film and the people who were responsible for its production. I don't know about the rest of you, but when you look at the 4 awards that are awarded here today, 2 of them are for truth-telling about the leadership of our military. The very people for whom our society looks to as the epitome of honor and integrity are military leaders, our uniformed military leaders. These military leaders are the very front line of our nation's defense. But yet it appears from the awards given here today that we can no longer depend on them to tell the American people the truth. This is a reality that the civilian leadership of our country should take measures to correct immediately, and one that all Americans should view as a very real and present danger to our democratic process. There are factions within our country or our society today who try to paint any member of our civilian leadership as unpatriotic or anti-American if they dare to hold any of these military leaders accountable for what they say are right. This has made many members of our Congress unwilling or afraid to ask these military leaders the tough questions when they appear at congressional hearings. President Eisenhower's January 1961 farewell speech to our nation and his ominous warning about the military-industrial complex has become a reality. It's here. Our highest military leaders are now in the practice of protecting that industrial complex over the protection of our own men, women, and their families who volunteered and serve and protect this nation. My hat goes off to Lieutenant Colonel Davis for writing his Tell It Like It Is report concerning the actual conditions on the ground in Afghanistan. That took not only truth-telling, that took a lot of courage. This lieutenant colonel basically put his entire chain of command on report, especially seeing how he didn't have enough time to retire yet either. So, telling the truth is truly many times harder than just falling in line and going along with the status quo. I congratulate all the winners here today, and I close in saying, Semper Fidelis, which means always faithful, and keep telling it like it is, like it really is. Thank you.
See why I love this day? This year's book prize will be presented by Karen Greenberg, who has written extensively about the ongoing but unnecessary clash between anti-terrorism efforts, national security, and civil liberties. She will be presenting the award to Ali Soufan, whose book and career in the FBI remind us that it is only through honoring American values and not resorting to torture that we can effectively combat terrorism.
So I want to thank the Ridenhour Awards Committee for recognizing Ali Soufan. He is, without a doubt, a national treasure and a national hero, and I'm here to tell you why. Part of this you already know. He is the single person who stood up within the United States government and said, not just is torture wrong, not just are we doing it, but we know how to do it better. I've done it better. My colleagues have done it better, and ultimately, you are making it unsafe for us. Dissent is not about the rest of us advocating for the Constitution and for our rights and liberties. Dissent is about those people, like the Ridenhour Awards honor, that know that even though it means their career, their livelihood, their passion, their interests, they are willing to give it up, to stand up for what they believe is the deepest form of patriotism, and that is their commitment to the country. Ali Soufan is being recognized today for The Black Banners, a book which he wrote with Dan Friedman, who is here today, and you should stand up and take some credit for this book. This is a book that was written with a passionate energy, and you will find that out when you read it. He didn't write it because he considers himself a writer. In fact, I think that was part of the learning process. Ali chose to join the FBI as a special agent whose task was understanding al-Qaeda instead of becoming like the rest of us, either getting a PhD or getting some kind of advanced degree. His passion is geopolitics and the security of the globe, and he has continued to do that since his encounter with the national security establishment and the way in which it failed him in not standing up to its values. I want to just tell you one thing that goes unannounced. This book that he has done is heavily redacted. When you open it, you will be somewhat surprised to see that almost in one case, an entire chapter is missing. That is the chapter, it won't surprise you, about his interrogation of Abu Zubaydah. Abu Zubaydah is an al-Qaeda operative now at Guantanamo who Ali was interrogating and to whom, and he was interrogating and he was confessing to Ali about things we need to know, who al-Qaeda is, who our enemies are, what the next attack might be, who really had brought about 9/11, how it happened, when the CIA interrupted the interrogation and took Abu Zubaydah off to a CIA black site where he was tortured. Enhanced interrogation techniques were used against him, including waterboarding, and he was there for 3 years until he went to Guantanamo. The reason this is important is not that it's just any old expose of torture. The reason this is important is not just because we know that Ali Soufan stood up to tell us the truth about what happened and that he was getting the information ahead of time. It's not just important because it's a story that we have. It is important because, and I don't want you to forget this or overlook it, Abu Zubaydah is the single individual that the Bush administration and the defenders of torture have pointed to as the person who justified our torture policy. He is the person they say gave us fact after fact about individuals. He is the person who told us about, we are told, about the plots that developed. So for somebody to come out and say that this interrogation had already been done, that it had been done lawfully, that we had the information, and that we had gotten more information, we would have gotten more information, is a vastly important fact. And although it's redacted in the book, it has not been redacted from Ali Soufan's testimony on the Hill. It has not been redacted from our major news media. So I invite you all to know this fact. I want to tell you something else about Ali. He is one of the kindest, most interesting, smart, intelligent, and loyal persons I have ever met. So For me, this is giving an award to a friend as well as to somebody who I deeply respect and admire. I want to say that it would not surprise me if sometime in the next decade or 2 decades, he gets another Ridenhour Award. It is my great pleasure to present this year's Ridenhour Prize to Ali Soufan.
Thank you. Thank you, Karen, for your kind introduction and for your friendship and the great work you still do. It's a great honor to be presented with this award and to be in the company of people who have done so much. I'd like to take a moment to recognize somebody who took that award before me, the gifted Anthony Steed, for his extraordinary life. That ended unexpectedly, but whose ideal for searching for the truth will forever live. It will ever live among those who he inspired. And please allow me to thank the Nation Institute, Randy Fertel, and the Fertel Foundation for this great honor. And thank you, Andy and Ruth, and everyone else who helped putting this event together. Also, I would like to thank my agent, Andrew Wiley, and Star Lawrence from Norton, who believed in this project, regardless to all the headaches it brought to the folks at Norton. Janet Bryan for her amazing editorial skills. Also, I would like to thank my co-author, Dan Friedman, who I share this honor with. His dedication and commitment to the truth exemplified the highest of ideals. So thank you, Dan. But above all, I have to thank my wife, Heather, for everything that she went through with me when I was in the government and after I left the government, and for allowing me to go on all these long missions and spend so many times, so many hours in the office, and then still letting me back into the house afterwards. So thank you, honey. I am honored and humbled. I feel that an award named after Ron Ridenhour was not made just to recognize a book, to recognize an author, or to recognize a person. It is made to acknowledge all those who refuse to shrink from a challenge, all those who dare to say no to the powerful, all those who sacrificed their own comfort and well-being for the greater good, and all those who continue to risk their lives to defend our values while protecting our freedom. So I accept this award only in trust. When James Conant was president of Harvard, he kept on his desk a little model of a turtle, under which was inscribed, "Behold the turtle. It makes progress when its neck is out." We are fortunate. We are fortunate in America to have so many people who are willing to stick their neck out for our great nation. Not only those who fight on the front lines, but also those who stick their neck out at home. Activists, journalists, public servants, ordinary people, and yes, every now and then politicians. It's often not easy to speak up. It's easier to be silent. It's easier to obey. It's easier to follow the crowd. Standing up comes with consequences. Whisper campaigns, false charges, harassments, and even threats are sometimes made. The prospect of those alone silences many. But despite this, our great nation has a strong and noble history of people sticking their neck out. I believe it's part of our national spirit. Our country's founding fathers were the first to stick their neck out. And since then, our country has always strived to be a shining city on a hill. And if some in Washington forget that, there are those who stick their neck out and remind them. In our great country, no one is supposed to be above the laws, not even presidents and vice presidents. When I witnessed the beginning of the introduction of the so-called enhanced interrogation techniques, which are not only un-American and unethical, but they are ineffective and so damaging both to our national security and our moral fiber as a nation, I was fortunate that my superiors in the FBI, right through to the director's office, agreed that we don't do that. EITs were designed by bureaucrats with no experience with Al-Qaeda, by people who had never met a terrorist, let alone interrogate one. Unsurprisingly, it ended with disaster. False leads were chased, and real opportunities were missed, and justice was never served. And to top it off, those behind this calamity destroyed the interrogation tapes, the evidence of their failure, the evidence of their unprofessionalism, the evidence of their incompetence. But while those people may have escaped official censures, history has damned them. And it is the professionals inside our security agencies who stuck their neck out, who objected, and took their complaints to their inspector generals and fought through other channels. It is them who won at the end, and history will applaud them. It is a testimony for them and really to our country that in 2005, only 3 years after the mistake of beginning the EITs was made, still under the same administration, it was shelved. Unfortunately, there are still those who continue to repeat the tales of their own fantasies and make false claims, even ridiculously trying to steal the credit of the death of Osama bin Laden, putting it down on EITs. It's almost comical how they try to claim every single piece of intelligence we got came from torture, even the fact the record shows otherwise. In the case of bin Laden, those subjected to the EITs denied knowledge of what we later, years later, knew that they actually know. That's success? Jose Padilla, who they claim was arrested because of waterboarding, was already in custody months before waterboarding was even authorized or administered. They need a time machine for that. Next, they will claim that we defeated Nazi Germany, we won the Cold War, we put a man on the moon because of waterboarding. You know, it would be comical if it's not our national security here at stake. The public battle over EITs remind me of Winston Churchill, something he said a long time ago. He said, a lie gets halfway around the world before the truth has a chance to get its pants on. My book, as you heard from Karen, is full of redactions, unjustifiable ones, designed to prevent lies from being corrected. But while they may think they scored a success by redacting, they've ironically done a great service to the truth in the long run. Because you can only redact what is true. When people eventually get to read it unredacted, they know it contains the truth. This, incidentally, is why the books defending EITs have no redactions. Because after all, you cannot redact fiction. Time and history is on our side. And never forget that while the turtle moves when it sticks its neck out, and it only moves slowly, in the end, it beats the rabbit in the race. Thank you, and the truth will never be negotiable.
The awards we have given so far are to people who are still in the midst of history while it's unfolding. None of their stories has yet reached resolution, whether it's your personal struggle or the societal wrongs you're battling. We'll stand with you as you continue that journey. But we can hold out as inspiration our final speakers. These men are historic figures from one of our country's most difficult battles against evil, and they ultimately triumphed. John Siegenthaler is one of America's most important newspapermen. For nearly half a century, he set the standard for great papers at the Nashville Tennessean. He's continued to this day as one of the premier defenders of the First Amendment. In the 1960s, he took a brief break from journalism to work for then Attorney General Bobby Kennedy, where he personally entered into the civil rights struggle. In fact, he was hospitalized after being hit in the head with a pipe while he was protecting a freedom rider in Alabama. We are all profoundly fortunate to be in the presence of both John Siegenthaler and the 2012 Courage Prize recipient he will be introducing, Representative John Lewis. If Joe Biden were here, he would say, "This is a big effing deal."
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Please sit down. You're going to have to stand up again in just a minute. I'm almost 85 years old, and I'm Southern. Old men think slow. Southern boys talk slow. Very, very difficult in the time allotted to really tell you about courage and John Lewis. But I'll try. I'd like to ask you for a moment in your mind's eye to go back with me more than 50 years to that time when I first laid eyes on this teenage seminarian at American Baptist College who had come there from a sharecropper's chicken farm in Alabama. He came to study at a city, as was every city in the South, the city of my birth. I ask you to think about that city, for if you were John Lewis, there was no place in that city you needed to go or wanted to go that you were permitted to go. You were barred by local ordinance, state statute, a Supreme Court decision called Plessy versus Ferguson, and by the damnable signs that everywhere told him where he might go and where he must not go. Think back on that time. He immersed himself in the study of nonviolence by a mentor who was one of the true great spiritual leaders of this country, a man named James Lawson, who taught John and his young colleagues the Gandhian principle of nonviolence. And as a result of that, John, as a leader, in the face of great danger, participated, as you know, in those sit-ins, in those stand-ins that desegregated movie theaters, on those freedom rides where violence awaited. There was not a day, he demonstrated, when the threat was not real, when his life was not endangered. I tell you, the blood he shed, the stain has long since faded from the sidewalks of my city, from the pavement of the bus terminal in Montgomery, Alabama, where he almost died, from the approach to the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma. I will tell you, if his colleagues were here, they would say whether their mentors pleaded with them, whether their parents pleaded with them, don't do it. Don't endanger yourself. Don't give up your life. I will tell you, it was John Lewis who said, we will go. We will march. There came a night as they were about to take up freedom rides that had died in Birmingham because of a Klan attack on the first wave of freedom riders. There was that night when John Lewis and his young compatriots literally signed their last wills and testaments, leaving what little they had to their families and their parents. His whole life has been a life of courage, a life committed to truth and justice. And for 15 years now in Congress, John Lewis' voice in a time of conflict in the world and here at home. We're reminded by reports of violence, racial violence, almost monthly. John Lewis has stood in Congress. His voice has been the voice of the voiceless. He has spoken for the poor and the powerless at a time when it takes courage to go against the grain of his competitors. Yes, he stands for openness and accountability for those who are powerful and hold power in their hands. The word courage is synonymous with the name John Lewis. And those of you who know him, and those of you who watched him, know that while he is the congressman from the 5th District of Georgia, he is the congressman for so many of us who at this time find ourselves voiceless, powerless to go against the grain. This time, this tragic time, he still seeks to establish the beloved community. He still strives in the quest to make ours a more perfect union. For all his courage has meant to make my town, our region, our country, this world, a better place, it is my great pleasure to present the Ridenhour Prize for Courage to John Lewis, Congressman from the 5th District of Georgia.
Thank you. Thank you to Fattel Foundation, the Nation Institute, for this Ridenhour Prize. Thank you, my friend, my beloved brother, for those kind words. John Singerthaler, this wonderful, unbelievable man, we've both almost died in Montgomery, Alabama, 51 years ago during the Freedom Ride. I'm honored to be in your presence. Thank you. When I was growing up outside of Troy, Alabama, 50 miles from Montgomery, as a young child, I saw those signs that said white men, colored men, white women, colored women, white waiting, colored waiting. I would ask my mother, my father, my grandparents, my great-grandparents, why? And they would say, that's the way it is. Don't get in the way. Don't get in trouble. But one day, in 1955, at the age of 15, I heard about Rosa Parks. I heard the words of Martin Luther King Jr. on our radio. And I was deeply inspired, deeply moved to find a way to get in the way, to get in trouble. Good trouble, necessary trouble. And so for many years, I've been getting in trouble. Sometimes I feel like I've been tracked down by what I like to call the spirit of history. To do what I must do, to do what Dr. King called redeem the soul of America, to create the beloved community, to create a community that respects the dignity and the worth of every human being. It's our calling, it's our mission, to try to do what is right. The only thing I tried to do, John, after listening to Jim Lawson, Martin Luther King Jr., meeting Rosa Parks and others, to bring the dirt and the filth from under the American rug, out of the cracks and corner, in order for us to deal with it. I want to thank members of the media, the members of the press, all of you journalists, for doing all you did. Without the media, without the photographers, the civil rights movement would have been like a bird without wings. Thank you for telling the story. Thank you for getting in the way. On the Freedom Ride in Montgomery on May 20th, 1961, the same year that Barack Obama was born, 1961. I saw members of the media trying to cover what was happening. Your colleagues, some were beaten, pads and pencils taken, cameras destroyed, because people didn't want the outside world to see and know the truth. Keep on telling the truth. Keep on getting in the way. Keep on speaking up, speaking out. Some of us during that period accepted the philosophy and the discipline of nonviolence as a way of life, as a way of living. I think we have an obligation, a mission, and a mandate to educate, to inspire, to inform all of our citizens who live on this little piece of real estate, not just America, but the world, that there is a better way, the way of peace, the way of love, the way of nonviolence. One of the young men that attacked and beat me and my white seatmate on May 9th, 1961 in Rock Hill, South Carolina, came to my office in '09 and said my son had been trying to get me to reach out to people that I had beaten. And I'm here with my son. I want you to know that I want to apologize. Will you accept my apology? Will you forgive me? And I said, yes. He started crying. His son started crying. He gave me a hug. I cried. I hugged. And we just stood there. And since then, since that time, I've seen this gentleman 4 other times. He called me brother, and I call him brother. There's certain immutable principles that we cannot give up on, that we cannot deviate from. So keep telling the truth. Be not afraid. Be of good courage. Just go for it. Thank you very much.
What did I tell you? Let me invite my friend Andy Breslau, the president of the Nation Institute, to come up to give some final closing remarks.
There's an idea in our culture that's all too prevalent that somehow cynicism is somehow smarter. If this event does not kick that pernicious idea in the teeth, I don't know what does. I first want to congratulate all the winners and, for this year and those of past years who are present with us. I want to thank particularly Randy Fertel for his creativity in creating this. Conrad Martin of the Fund for Constitutional Government's leadership and guidance. Louis Clark of the Government Accountability Project. Whose staff does an amazing job defending these men and women from the institutions that turn their backs on them. I also, our fantastic MC, and also our important strategic partner, Danielle Bryan. And I want to take a personal moment of privilege for one of the institutions that's charged with putting on this event. It's important to thank those who help us put the food on the tables and create this hospitable and inspiring atmosphere. So first I'd like to thank the Stuart R. Mott Foundation. Our good friends at AFSCME, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. The Chrysalis Fund, Micheline Klagsburn and Ken Grossinger. The Schooner Foundation. Our good friend Ann Cashin. The Bauman Family Foundation. The people who do important work at EPIC, the Electronic Privacy Information Center. The Institute for Policy Studies. And OMB Watch. You'll also note that this is a bigger audience that we've had at the Ridenhours before, and which is thrilling. But it also means it costs us a little bit more. So there are envelopes discreetly placed on your chairs. If you should be so inspired to help us out, the information on how you can do that is in those envelopes. Lastly, before I have one final thought, I'd like to thank my staff, without whom all this couldn't be pulled together. And that's Dimitri Siavalis, Jayati Vora, Marissa Colon-Margulis, Jenny Hendricks, and most of all, Ruth Baldwin and Taya Kittman, who really are the soul of making this thing happen. I'd like to acknowledge the chair of the Nation Institute, David Jones, who is here. And I want to finally conclude with some thoughts that actually Ali foreshadowed. On February 12th, 2012, Anthony Shadid, a member of the Ridenhour family, died in Syria while doing what he loved and what he felt was his calling. Anthony Shadid was our eyes and our ears, our critical intelligence, and our heart on the ground in some of the world's most dangerous and misunderstood places. His admired and award-winning career at the Washington Post and the New York Times was distinguished not only by physical courage and rigorous reporting, but by his writerly, unmistakable voice that vividly brought readers to places that are too often reported as cold abstractions. Shadid's work projected nuance, it projected empathy. Shadid insisted on complications in a world hell-bent on forgetting the human dimensions of war. This was a man whose craft was only exceeded by that of his humanity. His 2006 Ridenhour Award-winning book, For Night Draws Near, masterfully showed us our country's misadventures in Iraq through a mix of sophisticated understanding of our foreign and military policy, Iraq's fractious and dangerous domestic politics, and most poignantly, through the lens of the too often forgotten Iraqi people themselves. Anthony Shadid's work was predicated on that rare, long-lost art of listening. It saddened us all and the Ridenhour family that such a voice so young is now stilled. We dedicate this year's Ridenhour Prizes to the memory of Anthony Shadid. Thank you all so very much for coming. As you work your way out, please try to be quiet because we've been told there are many other events going on. Thank you.